Hi everyone, welcome to a webinar on Revit for collaboration, tips and tricks. I'm Alyssa Jairus and I'm a BIM specialist at Baker Baines. Okay, so just quickly for those of you who don't know who Baker Baines is, we're a reseller of Autodesk software and a bunch of other things. We offer and provide services such as our training center that we have here, that we do some training, and a bunch of things like CAD Learning, which is an online portal, and a few of the listed items there. I won't go through all of them. At Baker Baines, we believe in designing a better world and delivering better project or product, and in technological adoption to produce better results. And how we do this is by having the best people. We like to think that we do have the best trainers and the best consultants. And we believe in a superior customer experience with regard to our support desk and a blended learning approach. Just quickly on our agenda. Okay, so we're going to go through types of collaboration and what that means and the differences between all of them. We're going to go through managing your team work sharing processes. The big one there is dealing with corrupt Revit models if you've been doing work sharing before. And we'll look at some best practices for work sharing and then a little on the model strategy examples that we have or suggestions that we might have for you. Okay, so just quickly, let's go through types of collaboration. Okay, so if you're not familiar with what work sharing is, it's a method that allows multiple people to work on one Revit model. There's a method that I now kind of put into a category, which is with regard to internal and external. So internal would be within your own company and your own project team, and external would be the rest of your consultants and your bigger and wider project team that's not possibly in your own office. So there's two differences between that, and we're going to look at both of those items there. So first, the external. Okay, this is with your project collaboration team. And that means if you're in the architectural space, it would mean your engineers and your architects and maybe your surveyors, whoever is working in Revit. You have the ability to now link in Revit models into your own Revit model if you have one, via a couple of processes, by linking in Revit or IFC files. Hopefully it's Revit, not IFC files. Then it's a little bit more intelligent. And usually we suggest using a shared coordinate system to help link in that information a little bit more intelligently. And I'm going to use the build environment, which is construction and building construction, as an example. So what is shared coordinates? So I'm just going to read that out there. When you combine multiple projects or multiple models and files in a single project, you use shared coordinates to establish the same positions of files in relation to each other. So when I, for example, if I pick a coordinate at the on the corner of the building, in the electrical model and the architectural model, they should all have the same values, as well as in elevation or section. If I check my level information, I should have the same information. So usually the system flows down from a site or topography model in a perfect world. We would get that information from your civil engineer, who would draw up the topography and set up those coordinates. And if you don't have someone like that in your team that's on Revit, then the next person that would do that is your architects, and you'll find that information in your architectural model. The other engineers, the other consultants then can attain the coordinates via acquiring coordinates from one's model, let's just say the architect's model, and apply those to their own model. Okay, all of those bits of tools would be found under the Manage tab. So just a quick tip there is you should derive the same shared coordinate system from one file. You shouldn't be using, multiple files. Your project team members should agree on a file that would be kind of the master file to get the information. And obviously, that master file needs to be fully coordinated when it comes to where's the north point, and what is the coordinates of the site, and where's the site topography coming from. So that's external. Now let's look at the internal methods. Okay, so internal methods would be firstly local work sharing, and that's creating a central model on a server or a PC that serves as a server. And then we can connect user A, B, C, and D, and they can then connect and create a local model onto their desktop that then reads the central model, but is not working directly on the central model itself. Each user uses their local model, and when he or she decides that, okay, I want to save, the term would now be synchronized. So the synchronization process would happen in such a way that whatever changes the user A or B or C for that matter have made on their PCs and local model, that then gets sent to the central model and gets updated there. And whatever has been changed by any of the other users on the central model then gets moved and changed onto the user's local model. And that process is called synchronization. Okay, you need to set this up and tell the model that it needs to be a central model in order to allow this to happen. When it comes to Revit-based cloud work sharing, we use BIM 360. So, for example, to give you a little idea, the reason why we use BIM 360 is your company firms might not be in the same location. So not everyone might have access to that server. So that's why we have now introduced BIM 360, which is cloud-based and having a shared model or a central model on the cloud that firm A, B, and C can then now share information and create their locals off of that file that you see on the cloud. Okay, same process except we're taking the central model and placing it onto the cloud, and then you don't have to be near user A, B, and C. You could be in a different country but still be able to access and work on that file. Okay, so quickly let's go through managing team processes. We'll look both at internal and external and what to possibly use and what tools to use to help you with that. So I'm going to go on external first. With regard to external, if you guys have done work sharing before, most of the activity happens along the left-hand side of the Collaborate toolbar, and people often forget that there's a whole right-hand side of items that you probably never clicked on. And I'm just going to go through what each of those does, and then you should just go and try them out and see, and then hopefully that would help your processes with the external project team be a little bit easier. For example, we have copy monitor, which a lot of engineers would use and know of. And if you're an engineer and you're sitting in here and you're not sure of it, then you should definitely be clicking on that. So what this button basically does is you might, for example, I'm going to use the built environment again. We have the architect's model, so I'm maybe the architect, and the structural engineer gives me his or her model. And now instead of me creating duplicate floor slabs, and essentially I'm going to link in the structures Revit model and work off of my model. And if I created my own floor slabs, I would now see floor slabs from my own architectural model and that of the engineer or the structural engineer. So I can use copy monitor tool to copy over items and monitor them if they ever change in the external model on the LinkedIn model. So for example, I copy the floor slab onto my model. It becomes a live floor slab in my actual model that I can interface with. but it also gets monitored, and you can allow it to monitor it so that if the structural engineer's model changes or their floor slab changes, be it material, or be it the size or the location, then your model on the next reload would give you a warning telling you that a coordination review needs to be conducted and you need to just be wary of the changes. Okay, so that's just an example of in a built environment world. There's a couple of other examples of what to copy and monitor. So if I look at the project setup related elements, essentially your grid lines and your project levels. If you're an engineer or another consultant that's working off of maybe the architects or the structural engineers level lines and grid lines, and you maybe want to copy monitor those over so that at any moment in time, you're not duplicating level lines, and you're also monitoring levels and grid lines so that if anything changes in the original file or the master file, then you get notified of the changes thereafter. This can be done with columns as well. So there's some design related elements. So if you're an engineer as well, instead of creating your own ceiling, if you are doing electrical and placing in light fittings onto a hosted ceiling becomes a bit tricky, then you can copy monitor the ceiling from the architect's model and place in your light fixtures as if it was your own. And if anything changes in the architect's model and you reload the new link, or the Revit link, it would then highlight and say that something is different in your model and just review the changes to see what's up. Okay, so there's a whole bunch of stuff, also plumbing fixtures as well. So check out that tool. The next one is coordination review. So again, if items are monitored, then I can conduct a coordination review and just to check to see if there hasn't been anything that has changed on the Revit linked model that might have interfered with any of the monitored and copied over items that I wanted to just check and see if nothing's changed. So I can monitor a whole bunch of items from the other linked elements to just see if anything's changed or moved. Then we have the last one there is interference check. I kind of skipped 2 in there because those 2 items, coordination settings and reconcile hosting, both kind of, they work hand in hand with the other tools. So I just jumped to interference check, and it's kind of like a very basic coordination review, if I might. Not the coordination review button that I just spoke about, but essentially if you think about Navisworks, kind of like a clash detection, we can do interference check to check items, and I'm just going to quickly jump to my Revit model in front of me so that we can quickly see what that means, and I'm going to open up that screen. Okay, so I've got a local file in front of me. This collaborate tab or this coordinate panel isn't only for work sharing, it can be for other items. So I can go to interference check and run an interference check. Depending if I have a couple of items or linked in elements, I could select another Revit link in here and my current project, and then tick what I want to check against each other to see if there's no kind of clashes or anything. I'm not too sure if I'm going to find any clashes in here. So I can click that, and then it would tell me that, hey, something's going on here. There's a clash going on. Go and review this, and I can go to show and then go see what clash or something. If it's something I can ignore, then I would go down the list and just tick and just see what kind of it pertains to me. This is quite nice for before coordination, actual coordination meetings. It would be quite handy for people to actually run their own clashes, especially with the services, before they actually get to those meetings, so that they can resolve any minor issues that they could possibly do by themselves. Just going to switch back my screen. All right. So that is interference check. Then we have internal. Okay, so if I look at internal items, that's now, I'm going to speak more about the local work sharing processes. So if you're very familiar with local work sharing and a server-based, having Essential on the server, then you've probably seen a couple of these items. So I'm going to just go through them. So show history is the first one I have there. There's a section to add comments to the sync process. Sure, you've seen it. I'm going to open it up in a bit after I kind of discuss those two items or all three items, and then we'll just check up on my PC. So add comments to sync. You can add, if I just drop down that little menu, and I'm sure you could find it on the options or right on the status bar at the top, you can drop down this option and open up the sync settings. And right at the bottom, there's a comment section, which you can add a comment if there's a major thing happening, or maybe there's a big design change or something that you need to keep record of. You can then add a comment to this, and the other users could possibly pop that up and see that. And how do we see this? That's the next option there, is exploring the history of the central model. There's a show history button under the collaborate tab, and if I hit that option, I could select the central and pop open a kind of a directory of history of items, of who's kind of synced or saved last, and what date, and the comments that you would have seen people add as well. And we'll test this out in a bit. So I'm just gonna do two more options, and then, or two more items, and then we'll just pop over to the software. So the third item is work sharing, using work sharing monitor for Revit. Everyone who has Revit should have this, and if you don't, then you'll be able to open up your Autodesk Desktop Connector app and just download or update your Revit work sharing monitor. So why would you need this? There's a nice list of examples. This is managing work sharing, basically. So if you have a work shared model, you can check certain items. So things like who is currently on your work sharing project or on your project. Is my local copy of the project up to date? When will my synchronize with central operation finish? So you could see the process being in progress if you have, you know, maybe slow server speed or whatever it might be. Has my request to borrow elements been granted? So you can check notifications with regard to that, and if there are any issues interfering with my work on my Revit project. So we could open that up separately, and next to our workshed project, or while our Revit is open, we can have that open as well. And I'll check this out after this slide. So the last one would be work sets, using work sets. Work sets is basically a way of managing elements. A work set is a collection of elements in a workshed project. Now you can place items, maybe I'll give you a basic example. Maybe let's place everything on the first floor on a work set called first floor, and at any moment in time, if you had maybe 5 floors, and person user A needs to work on first floor, they would then own or have ownership of work set floor 1, and anyone that wants to work on that needs to ask them permission in order for them to be granted to work on maybe a small portion or whatever it might be. Now, those work sets can be created by you, and it's very project dependent, you know, whether is your building kind of very vertical? Is it a big high rise building where multiple floors? And you might as well do a work set per level. If you have a wide building, maybe a hospital, something like a mall that has different wings, you could then set out your work sets to be maybe wing east wing or north wing, and people could work on that accordingly. So it depends on your project and what works for you. If you have a very, very, very small project, you might not even need work sets. Work sets just helps you manage the processes a bit better, so that you're not constantly asking for permissions to move small elements. When you keep seeing the notifications pop up to request element, request permission, then you want to maybe set up your work sets. It is preferred to set up work sets in the initial stages of the project. You're not limited to do that halfway, but obviously it's some manual labor. It's kind of like layers in AutoCAD. Okay, so before I go on to dealing with corrupt files, I'm going to quickly switch over to check out those 4 things that we were talking about. So the first one was under the synchronize and modify settings, which you can both find at the top here or under the collaborate tab. I can add a comment to say that, you know, maybe this was issued for construction, major submission. I'm really just making up some things, and then I can, on my next synchronize, that information is going to get sent to the central model. And let's hope this doesn't crash. Okay. Synchronize now. So I'm sending that comment off the next synchronization. So if I go back there, you can see the comment is blank. So how do we see those comments? And show history is going to help us. That's the next point. Show history under the collaborate tab allows us to select a Revit model, and we can then open that and show the history of this file. And I can see who's been synchronizing, and I'm not sure who those people are. I'm thinking that maybe that's coming from the Autodesk, because if you're familiar with this, it's the Autodesk sample project. So I see there's a bunch of people there that I'm not too familiar with, but we can see that I've synchronized at that time, and there's my comments there as well. You can export this out and change minor things that you can do, but that could be quite helpful. Okay, so I'm going to close that. And the other thing that we spoke about was Revit work sharing monitor. So I'm just going to quickly open that work sharing monitor for Autodesk Revit. It obviously is 2020, and you need to have my Revit open with my work shared model. I'm going to open that, and I think it might take a few minutes. I'm just going to wait for it. Okay, should open any moment. Okay, there we go. I see it there. All right, so I can have this open next to my Revit, and I would see a bunch of people that are currently on the workshed model, and you can see that I'm working in the local. And obviously, when I sync, you would see different information here depending on the time remaining. There's also requests and notifications that you could go through if there's any. And there's a bunch of options and system performance. Okay, under options, there's a whole bunch of items that I could select or tick off or on, depending on what I want to see within this work sharing monitor. Okay, so if you have this, or you should have this if you have Revit, go check it out, see what it does. The last one is work sets, and I'm going to quickly show you where it is. So I could essentially go to the collaborate ribbon right at the top there. You can see that I can hit that button and have work sets, and I would add new work sets and pop items into that. And I can see the owners and who's borrowing the item as well. I would also find the same tool right at the bottom here. Okay. Essentially, every element, and I'm just going to go to a wall, for instance, every element would have a work set that it's placed under, and you, when you're drawing, should switch between work sets that you might want to draw on. Okay, kind of like layering. I'm going to switch back to the presentation. All right. Okay, so dealing with corrupt models. This is a big one for people. If you've worked on work shared models, you would know that these things do get corrupt. Okay, so, oh no, my model is corrupt. What do I do? How does a model become corrupt, or a central model become corrupt. So I've got 3 main points, and it could be a variety of things, but 3 main ideas that we've come across. So the first one is a very unstable server or server connection. Sometimes the server is crashing. That does cause a problem with the Revit model, or maybe there's a power outage during your synchronization, and then that connection gets lost. There are times where I've personally, even when I've worked on central models in a project environment, had issues when the server went down. So if the server goes down, you maybe not want to hit sync, but you may just want to save locally until that server is back up and running. The next one is Revit finds a corrupt Revit family in the model. So usually you're always, maybe finding nice Revit families that look pretty on the internet, but don't realize that maybe there's some errors in there. It's corrupt. It's been created in 2010 and you're busy upgrading it to 2020 or 2019. These things happen. And then you load it into your Revit model. After some time, it probably is going to get corrupt. If it wasn't built properly or geometry wasn't created properly, it might just corrupt your model. There's also the issue of users having different Revit version updates. Now, this is not something that's actually listed on the Autodesk websites that I've personally seen, but we've noticed that with a client that came back to us and said, hey, our Revit model got corrupt, and we tried to actually figure out what happened along the way, and we realized that user A had a different Revit version update done, so maybe theirs was up to date as per Revit 2019.1, and then Revit user C had just 2019 with no Revit update done. So this then caused somewhere along the line, when the synchronization process was happening, it caused the central model to become corrupt. So it's good to maybe keep Revit versions up to date, but we'll chat about that a little bit in the next slides. Okay, so what do I do if your central model is corrupt? Okay, first thing you want to check is who still has an up-to-date local model. If you have about 4 users on this project that are working simultaneously, and maybe user D now has probably a very, very late or recent version of the local model. You maybe want to then quickly just create a new central model off of that local model if the other users find that they cannot sync to the central model, or that the central model is now popping up to say that it's corrupt. So that's catching it and nipping it in the bud. But if that isn't the case, if you're unable to do that, you maybe want to restore a backup file. So I'll show you where those buttons are. So you want to restore a backup file, so restore an earlier version of the central model. And that's going to take probably the last synced option, or whatever the case is. Then we can remove, for corrupt Revit families, we can remove the Revit family that's been corrupted. How do we find those things? And can you open up the file at all? Because if you can't open up the file because of that, then we need to use other methods to actually get into there. But I will show you how to pinpoint a corrupt Revit family if you get a notification about a Revit family possibly being corrupt. So you can try and delete and remove it quickly before anything happens to your project. Then we can look at opening files in audit, which is a nice best practice as well. So on opening a file, and I will show you that as well, you could also allow or tick the box that says audit, so that when you're opening up your local files with the audit box ticked, it would help things. I'm sure people have seen the little error message saying missing elements. Revit can't find missing elements, something, it can't open the model. So if you do audits now and then on your local files when you're opening them, that would ensure or prevent messages like that popping up. So I'm just going to quickly jump to my model, and I'm going to show you a couple of those items. Okay, so obviously creating a new central model is as is. You should know how to do that. The restoring of backup. So if you can't create a central model off of somebody's local model, the next best bet is to restore backup. So under the Collaborate tab, there's Restore Backup. And I'm obviously going to go back one. I could find, let's maybe go to my actual model where the central model is. There's a whole bunch of stuff, all the webinars we've done. So I could click on that backup folder that you've probably seen. So that backup folder gets created when you create a local model or central model, sorry. And when you open up your local, you would also see a little folder in where your documents is as well. So I can click on that and hit open to restore the previous version of that central model. Alternatively, I could then send my model. I haven't written up that point. If none of those things are working, I will have to send my corrupt file to Autodesk. I'm not sure what they do there, but apparently it's a little bit magic because they'll be able to restore some of your items or your elements. So that's the last option there. If I have things like a corrupt Revit family, how do I find that? So I'm going to quickly jump to the Manage tab, and I'm going to hit the Warnings button. So Warnings is quite nice, and we're going to use that tool as well. So Warnings are a list of the items that pop up on the right-hand side of your screen that you probably hit Ignore for. It does get kept somewhere, and that somewhere is under Warnings. And you could see a list of the warnings that you've been ignoring. So example, highlighted walls overlap. For example, I will open up the first warning, and you can see that there has been wall A and B that are conflicting. So in here, I might even find a corrupt Revit family, or if the message pops up and allows me to open up the warnings for that corrupt Revit family, it would look something like this. I can then check up what the ID is. Okay, so I'm going to memorize that ID. I can either click there and say show. Alternatively, I could pinpoint that ID. So if I do a show, Revit is now going to highlight. I don't think that's the best example. There we go. Okay, it highlights and says, okay, that's the wall that I'm talking about. If you're unable to do that, you want to maybe jot down what that ID is. So I'm going to memorize that. So 627729. Okay, then we can use select by ID, which is just above that. And I'm going to type in 627729. Let's hope it's the right one. So that's the ID that was listed in my warnings, and I can hit show for Revit to then show me what element is that. And if it's the corrupt element, I want to maybe delete it. Okay, if I click on that, you can also see show related warnings to that item. Okay, it's the same pop-up box that would list the items wrong or what's wrong with this. I can also export that out if I need it in document. So I'm going to close that. And the last option there was opening a file on audit. So I'm just going to quickly hit open there and just let's go to maybe the same option there. Okay, just to give you an idea, I know this is a central model, but there's an audit tick box on any element. It doesn't have to be a central model, it doesn't have to be local, it can be any Revit model that you're opening. So I can hit the audit box, and it would highlight and tell me that, hey, it might take a little bit longer to open, but it would also correct any errors. And going forward, it would be best practice to actually do these in regular intervals. So I'm going to say no, I'm going to cancel out of there, and I'm going to switch my screen. All right. Okay, So obviously prevention is better than cure. So how can we prevent the file or the workshed model from getting corrupt? You want to maybe keep your Revit software up to date. If you're working in a team, say there's 4 of you guys working on this workshed model, then you want to make sure that if one person's doing an update on their Revit version, that everybody does that update. And it's not just one person doing their own thing. You need to communicate with your project team. You also want to perform regular model audits. So you can do that on the central model as well as the local model. Okay, every time you're opening up a new local model, you can hit the audit button. You want to also create a new central model on a weekly basis. Okay, I've personally had to do this on a couple of projects that I've worked on, and not just for the health of the central model or ever having to back up or backtrack a model, but we also know that clients from architectural space always have design issues that they change, within a heartbeat. And one day they want this, and the next day they want the thing that you've done like a week ago. So keeping a central model or backing up central models in an archived folder is good practice for those reasons as well. The last one is maybe clean out the Revit family before loading it into a project. Okay, make sure you know where you're getting it from. If it's something that someone's created in your office, I'm sure it's fine. But if you're getting it from Revit City specifically, you maybe want to check your Revit models or check those Revit families and purge them out, clean them out, make sure nothing is wrong with it, and then load it in. Okay, so on to best practices. All right, so work sharing tips. General tips is make sure the software is up to date. You want to make sure that your release of Revit is the latest one. I'm not talking about year versions. I'm talking about Revit 20.1, 2020.2. You want to make sure you're on the current update, and that is because Autodesk would fix small minor issues. Maybe you're having crashes, maybe there's something that's not working or functioning very well. Those updates would be the best bet to fix those minor issues. If you're not sure where to update those, you're going to look onto your desktop. You should see an icon called Autodesk Desktop app, and you can run updates from that. You want to keep the workstation specifications common along the project team. You also want to do a regular maintenance on the central file, and you want to make sure that there's consistent network locations and map drives. Why we brought this up is because we've noticed for one of our clients is that when client or user A was creating a central, user B could not see that central, or they could see it but could not create a local file. And we tried to figure out what was wrong with it. We realized that the map drives were different. You know the little letter next to your Z or Y drive? Those letters need to be common along your whole project team so that your map drives or where you're saving your central model is consistent throughout. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so weekly best practices, audit your central file. Maybe it's a Monday morning, you want to get into the habit of just auditing your model, even your local file as well. You want to perform a coordination review, as we spoke about earlier, just to review any elements that have maybe been monitored or that you copied over from other external team members or consultants. You want to also perform an interference check to see that you're modeling properly. There's no duplicate walls on top of each other or ceiling on top of a ceiling, or whatever it might be. You want to review and resolve warnings. So I just clicked and showed you where that is. You want to check those warnings every now and then. Unfortunately, you can't ignore them, so there's no ignore button. You could review them. I've seen instances where there's nothing that you could do about the error, then it just kind of lies there. But there are some where it's kind of duplicate walls or just bad drawing habits. So you maybe want to check those out. You want to delete or delete all unused or redundant views, and that means that little section line that you keep drawing up to maybe show the client something, whoever it is, or to model up something nice. So I know that this happens often and it becomes very difficult to track which of those section lines need to be deleted. So a nice method that I've come up with is to actually create a section line called temp. So you will maybe duplicate the building section line or the wall section line and just rename it to call it a temporary section and use that section line, and maybe you can change what the head looks like and use that section line so that you know that it's a temporary one. You can delete it later, and it's best practice to delete it after you've been done with it. Let's also check out the purging. So purge all unused elements. So essentially, I'd like you guys to go through the list of purge elements. I'm just going to quickly jump to my other screen. Okay, to show you where this is. So under Manage tab, there's a purge unused. I'm going to click on that. So you maybe want to go through this list and not just purge everything. I have a nice 8 there that doesn't, you probably have 600 items in here. You don't want to just purge everything. You want to maybe check none and then go through the list. And why I say that is because you might have something loaded in here, maybe a Revit family, a chair, a little pipe, or whatever it might be. That's sitting in here, you've created, but you haven't placed it yet. So you maybe want to tick certain items that you don't want and then hit the OK button to purge those things. It's nice to do regular purges. Okay. We can also compact central models on synchronization. You remember this box here? That's making a central model. But there's also an option to compact the file. Okay, you can do that on synchronization. Okay, archiving. So you also want to maybe do archives. Create a little archive or superseded folder in your project folder, and maybe every now and then detach the central model and save it out as with a date, so that you can backtrack if anything happens to your central model. Okay, we spoke about work sets. There's a bunch of little tips there, but I think we've kind of covered a lot of this as well. So I'm just going to go to the next slide. Okay, model strategy examples. Just a quick run through through some examples that have been already used by some overseas, and I say overseas because it's probably not South African, some overseas buildings that the guys were working on. So this falls under more how the linking is done and how people have created, and that could have been essentially your own central model or your own Revit model. It doesn't have to be a central model, but how they've actually conquered big projects like this and how they've separated their files and linked files together to work. So we see here that we can create a site model that's separate, so it's better to keep your topography and your site information on one model separate from your main model and your building or whatever else it might be. Okay, then you can link those two in, and what's really nice is because the site is usually heavy, you can switch off the site or link in the main model. Okay, so kind of a promenade like this. Okay, along the beach side or wherever it might be, you want to maybe separate each model to be a building on its own, and then use the site or context model to then link that in to see the overall model. Okay, then people could work on this individually, or you could create central models off of these items. Okay, each of these would be a central model. Okay, the next one is repetition. Okay, this is more for facades and a little bit more complex structures. I see that they've separated, the one complex item from the other. Okay, kind of like the previous example. But we can also do it in the way that separates the facades. We could create a model that has a complex facade, and maybe the interior items in a different model, and those can link together to create one building. Okay, the same with the other on that, and these would all tie up and create one context central model. Okay, and these don't just have to be central models. This is just a good a method or example for just any linking of files at all. The other one there is more a retail project. Okay, I know guys do things very differently. We have our main model, and then we have the roof, which is very complex, as you can see here, on one Revit link or Revit model. And then I see the railings and bulkheads. That might have been very heavy and maybe very intricate, so they've separated that, and then they've separated the site to be on one model. And then they've linked that together and created their main build elements onto the main model. The other one here is phased projects. If you're familiar with project phasing in Revit, this is another method that you could use on bigger scale projects. You could maybe separate the phases as per, or separate the models as per phase. So in one model, we could have all existing elements demolished under one element, or link and the site on there. And we can link that in to have a main model. All right, so that was it. I'm going to hang around to just take any questions that anyone might have. So if you do have questions, now's the time. You can type in your questions, or if you need or have suggestions for any of our other topics, maybe send me an email and we'll consider using that as one of our webinars. Alternatively, any feedback or comments that you would like, or questions that you might have, please send them through. That's my email that you see there. I'll give you guys 5 or a few minutes for just questions that you might have. Okay, I don't see any questions. Just thanks, guys, and have a good Friday afternoon. Bye.